All right, welcome everyone to MLC's Research Jam number 28. Can't believe it's been 28, but it has. These research jams are sort of like a virtual lab meetings, group meetings, the type you might have gone to as part of a PhD. But anyone's welcome to call in and present work in progress, get feedback. Could be an idea, could be a full project halfway complete, could be a paper that's already published. Kind of anything is up for grabs. The first set of people we have presenting is Bryce, Raymond, and Lin. Do you guys want to take it away when you're ready?
Yeah, sounds good. I think I'm gonna go first so I can share my screen.
Perfect.
That's okay. How does that look?
Looks great.
Sweet. So, yeah, actually gonna kind of present on a little bit more of a engineering problem. The actual research side of the work is not really something I think I kind of want to present yet. Haven't really gotten far enough to really say much about it, but did do a lot with just trying to do reinforcement learning on large language models, in particular with GRPO. So yeah, so me and my collaborators here, we've formed our own lab, and we'll see how that goes. But if anyone else is interested in collaborating, we're very interested in working with more people. So yeah, so I guess like wanted to talk a little bit about what GRPO is. I actually have probably too many slides here to actually go into all the details, so I'm gonna skip the next few. But from a high level, GRPO is a reinforcement learning algorithm specifically for language models, and the idea is that we're just going to get rid of the value function in your typical actor critic reinforcement learning algorithm. And instead, what we're going to do is just take multiple samples from our language model and then just do just like a very basic mathematical normalization of the rewards. And basically, everything above the mean, we reinforce. Everything below the mean, we try to steer away from. And the whole idea is just that with a language model, the value function is very large, and so you have two separate models you need to keep in memory. And so by just doing this normalization, you're saving half your computational resources. And there's reasons to think that the value model doesn't really go that far for language models, specifically in this kind of like reasoning model training. And so, yeah, this is just a way to try to get a little more bang for your buck. So yeah, this is the objective function. Not going to go into, super high or super in depth here, but basically we're trying to reinforce when our advantages are positive, and we have some kind of KL constraint. And we're doing some kind of like clipping on this, which is to say we just make sure our importance ratio doesn't go too far. And then yeah, there's different parts here. Just kind of go through this quickly. But there's new algorithms to kind of try to adjust how we're doing the normalizations for both like this part of it and then the advantage. Anyway, yada yada. Yeah, different ways to calculate KL divergence. These are all estimators, Monte Carlo estimators. But this tends to work. This one on the left is the one that we use. Yeah, so there's a bunch of hyperparameters with GRPO, and this turns out to be quite tricky. GRPO is pretty unstable, and depending on how you set your hyperparameters, a lot of times it doesn't work. And that was my experience. I implemented GRPL from scratch in PyTorch. I wanted to do that because I intend to extend it and tinker with it. But it was also a good learning experience to have kind of all the code in front of me, not from a library, so I know what each part does. And AI is so capable now that you can just prompt it and kind of work through the algorithm piece by piece. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about kind of my experience of trying to actually use this algorithm. We used kind of a test toy problem, the game of 24. This is the exact prompt I give, and I did prompt engineer this a fair bit in order to get decent success rate right out of the bat. But the idea is you're given four numbers and you want to create a mathematical expression with those numbers that equals 24. So I kind of have some examples that I give the language model. If it's 8, 3, 2, 3, you can go 3 divided by 3 is 1, plus 2 is 3, times 8, 24. So yeah, there's the language models love to just keep blabbering, so I really tried to try to instill that it should be given the answer right away. The other problem that they have is that they don't handle the like number of times they should use each number correctly. That is something I experienced even after training that basically I couldn't get them to learn. Anyway, so the actual testing, how did it go? Most of the runs collapsed, probably 80%. And this is due, yeah, training is unstable. My batch size is too small. The learning rate is too large. Various problems like this, but you can kind of see what the model ends up doing. It's like starts with something reasonable and then just gets into this absolute gibberish of trying various numbers. I did notice that it does do better when it keeps trying more numbers because it's just going through more possibilities quicker. But this is, yeah, the rewards collapse to being nothing. And I had this happen, many times. I just kind of gave a few here. Likes to use the word wait. Yep. But yeah, pretty frustrating. Hard to get this stuff to work. The other thing is that, in the objective, there's this KL constraint. It kind of like depends. I don't know if you really want to use it for something where you have a clear reward of 1 and 0. That's verifiable without a reward model. I think like the KL constraint is really more when you're using a reward model. That's what a lot of the other literature says. But it may be stabilized training. I did have runs where, KL divergence is actually pretty low here, and I do have a slow bit of learning. Um, Otherwise, I did get some runs that actually worked fairly decently. This actually started with a evaluation accuracy of 22%, and by the end got to 62%, which is a pretty large increase. Yeah, so that's it. Just kind of some learnings from my implementing this myself. Lots of bugs. Getting the KL divergence correct was challenging. You can use a LoRa adapter, but it actually modifies the base model. Interestingly, some of the AIs, like I couldn't get O3 or Claude to recognize this, to like find the bug. And then I asked Gemini, and Gemini knew. So it's like kind of interesting as you do this development, switching between language models, asking them parts of your code, you actually get more information because some of them know things that the other ones don't. Yeah, clip in the wrong direction, computed loss on pad tokens, which just made my KL to be much larger than it would have been otherwise. And I'm still dealing with some evaluation versus training mode issues. Um, I don't have consistency in, yeah, when you're in training mode, you have dropout. And then, but then, yeah, going back and forth between them. Right now, it's giving me a memory issue. It's using too much memory. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but it's ongoing issue. Anyway, I have just a few open questions here, and then I'll hand off to Raymond. But yeah, there's lots of things that kind of like wanted to play with, haven't played with yet. There's a paper that actually came out about a week ago with a new like GRPO-esque algorithm, and these are like basically the same ideas, just changing kind of like the normalization scheme. In this new paper, we have like sequence level importance ratio as opposed to token level. And then there's just a bunch of other, I like only use one model. I don't actually understand exactly the impact of LoRa. Um, yeah. This other paper has another set of optimizations you can try to use. But yeah, that's it. I don't know if we want to do a couple questions now. If you have any questions, that's fine. Otherwise, I guess I'll hand it off to Raymond.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, my question is like the current kind of prevailing thinking is that reinforcement learning doesn't discover new reasoning patterns. It just amplifies patterns that already exist in a training corpus. So maybe that's why supervised fine tuning is needed to seed the model with useful reasoning patterns. So my question is, did you do any supervised fine tuning of this kind of a problem before trying to use reinforcement learning? And would it help?
Yeah, I've also heard the same thing. I didn't do any supervised fine tuning in this. My kind of thought is that prompt engineering like gets you pretty far. And so, yeah, you engineer a good prompt, and then you can do reinforcement learning, and you do see learning happen. Um, but I agree that, it is just probably reinforcing the abilities that were already present in the base model. But it still works. And yeah, this is also I started with a thinking model. So it was already trained to do thinking. I just trained it specifically on this problem, which we feel is out of distribution. And so we did see improvement.
So you started with Quen, right?
Correct.
Your model is Quen.
Yep.
What size?
1.7 billion.
Okay, and once it started getting results, does it get better? Does it generalize to like instead of 24, like 35? If you vary a little bit, uh, is it getting easier after first success?
That's a great question. I did not try with different like goal numbers, but my code can do that. I will say that even for Game of 24, it doesn't always come up with the same equation. Like it's not memorizing. It's definitely generalizing, but there's a lot that had to happen just in terms of like learning that it needs to go within my max token length. So like that's probably the source of most of the improvement is just giving more concise answers. Um, but yeah, I think I did see some distribution shift of, trying to use more numbers and yeah, less of the just like other kind of language.
Could you identify visually some interesting reasoning patterns discovered specifically for this problem? I'm just curious. Or it's hard to see them.
Yeah, like I said, I think the biggest thing was like more concise answers because half the time it'll actually find an answer and just keep babbling. So more concise answers, and then, like I said, just using more numbers as opposed to general language.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'll take over now.
Yep, sounds great. Do you want to share? I think that'll be easier.
Yes. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. So what I'll be talking about is a slightly different topic that I've been working on, which is on why is generalization hard and why do we need so much data? So for some context, people have noted for a while that deep neural networks are weirdly good at generalizing to problems. And even though a lot of classical theory would suggest that they shouldn't be able to because they have way too many parameters, they should just instantly memorize and not give good generalization. There's been a number of hypotheses about this. The one that I'll be talking about is a combination of ideas called the flat minima hypothesis and a more recent one called the volume hypothesis. But just for context, there are other ideas such as the intrinsic regularization of stochastic gradient descent, or there are inductive biases in the way that we make our networks that people also believe are important for generalization. So the one that I'll be talking about is the flat minima hypothesis. And this idea is pretty old and One, it has empirical results where people have seem to find that when they train a network and they evaluate how flat the minima is, the ones that have good test error tend to be very flat. As you can see over here, and I pulled this from this paper where you have this very flat minima over here that has 100% training accuracy and fairly good test accuracy, whereas the bad minima can still get 100% training accuracy but has very low test accuracy. There's some theoretical reasons for why we should believe flat minima are good. It means that your model, what flat means is that you can change your weights of their model quite a bit and you can still get a good performance. And so what this means is that your model has sort of learned like special features that actually represent your data and cleanly separate your data. Unfortunately, one of the issues with this hypothesis is that flatness is actually pretty hard to define because the networks have a lot of invariances. And so what exactly is a sharp and what exactly is a flat minima? People have debated about this and how to measure them. And the more recent idea that I mentioned, the volume hypothesis, is that note that if a minima is flat in a large number of dimensions, this means that it's going to have a huge volume compared to the sharper minima. And so if we train it, as long as we can find a minima, we're almost guaranteed to find one with very flat, that's flat because it just has a huge volume compared to the other one. And the other thing that I was interested in here was why do we need data in order to generalize? So in the context of the flat minima and volume hypothesis, there are two ideas for how data could be affecting this. One idea is that data makes the generalization minima that we actually want flatter than the bad minima. So we can imagine that here is a lost landscape with a low amount of data. As we add data, the actual minima that is pretty good tends to become larger and flatter than the other ones that we don't want. And in that case, there's nothing really we can do. The other idea, which is more promising, and I would like to be true, but we'll see, is that data helps erase the bad minima, but leaves our good minima unaffected. So if we have a bunch of minima for our lost landscape like this, with a certain amount of data, and as we add more data, these bad minima, which don't generalize, just tend to get penalized, while the original good minima was originally flat. It stays flat, it hasn't changed that much. It just so happens that all the bad minima have shrunk. And so now, in terms of the volume that these two things occupy, it's now much more likely to end up in a good minima as opposed to the bad minima. And if this was true, then it would be good because we could then use special optimizers or loss functions to increase generalization even if we don't have large amounts of data. Now, all of this requires whether or not which hypotheses of these is true requires being able to measure volumes. And so I'm going to present two ways that people have come up with for measuring volumes. The first one is a method called guess and check, which is literally you take some random parameters for a neural network. You keep taking them until you find one with good training accuracy. And according to these hypotheses, once you find one with a good training accuracy, the one it's more likely to find ones that when you have a good training accuracy, it's also very likely to have high test accuracy. So you'll see a sort of distribution in the minima that you get via guess and check, where the ones that appear most often are the ones that also have high test accuracy. And you can visualize this as follows. If you imagine we have some sort of lost landscape, and we're just sort of sampling like random points for a parameter, let's say x, and the flat minima will get more land in its little region compared to the sharp minima. Unfortunately, this is extremely impractical for high dimensions. We cannot just randomly guess parameters and expect to get a good network. This is what has spawned the other idea for measuring volume, which is what happens if we use random vectors and do local volume estimation. So we'll start off with some lost landscape. We'll initialize as some model. We'll use stochastic gradient descent or some other algorithm to find a minima. And then once we're inside the minima, we'll shoot out random vectors in high dimensional space. We'll see how long it takes until they reach some sort of loss threshold, and that will be our estimate for the volume. It's a very Monte Carlo type method. And for simple cases, these two volume measures agree, so there's no issue. And so this is sort of just what I've been working on, implementing some equations, implementing some code to measure what lost landscapes look like and do some random projections. As you can see over here, this is just for a very simple Swiss roll classification problem. Here are some lost landscapes. And one issue that I ran into here, which is why I'm not showing you any results from doing this for any interesting problems, is that local volume estimation, the second method that I showed, which works with high dimensional problems, is different from guess and check in the sense that local volume estimation only works if the set happens to be star convex. So one way you can visualize this is if let's say we have some sort of lost landscape over here and this red region is a region of where the loss is fairly low, then if we find some sort of minima indicated by this green dot, and we use local volume estimation, we'll get the volume of this blue region over here, which is absolutely not the volume of this red region, which is much larger. It only estimates like it can only see a certain small region when we do a local volume estimation idea. And one of the reasons this is problematic is because neural network parameter space is scale invariant. If you have a network and one layer has weights that are 10 times as large and one layer has weights that are 10 times smaller, then you'll just get the same output because they're just the weights propagate, sort of. And local volumes don't seem to be very scale invariant, and because they're not very scale invariant, you run into issues where they're not very star convex a lot. And that's sort of what I've been working on right now, just trying to figure out if I can figure out a better way to do this, or if I'll just have to bite the bullet and say we're just going to go with an approximation for volume, and we're going to do some realistic problems with that at least.
One
That is
question here. So are you setting some threshold for what defines the edge of this blue boundary or red
yes.
boundary? Like, what is that threshold?
The threshold in this case is just once the loss has gone a certain fraction above, or a certain just some random value I choose really above what the minimum that I found was. Then I'll just say that okay, once you reach that threshold, you have hit the boundary. Now tell me what the size of this basin is.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you set that threshold like closer and closer to the, if that threshold is tighter and tighter, so closer and closer to
Yes.
where you start, then
Yes.
I think you would find that the space converges in the limit to like a parabola because Taylor's theorem, Taylor's
Yes.
extension,
If
like
it's actual minima, it will be
if you're near a
to the
minima,
extent.
then the second order would be just an ellipse, which is star
Yes.
convex. And then of course, if you go really far away, then things are not going to be star convex ever.
But that doesn't really work for neural networks because of the scale invariance. So no matter what, you'll always be able to multiply one layer's weights by 10 times and the other one by the inverse, and you'll still get the same loss. And so in reality, there will never be a star convex set. There'll always be infinite. Which is something you can show mathematically.
Yeah, I think though, if you want to locally approximate the minima by a second order series, it'll
Mhm.
be accurate, like within a small region.
Yes. But I'm looking, I guess, for how can I like prove like a better way, or is this the best way we can do? Because a
Hmm.
lot of flat measures have had issues in the past with this, and the reason people have chosen this one in the past is because it's easy to compute. I'm willing to go a little step further, make it a little harder to compute in exchange for proving it's a little bit better.
Cool. I would also think about what your algorithm, this one or the other one you mentioned, would return in the case where, let's say you have, 10,000 dimensions and
Hmm
8,000 of the dimensions are quite flat and 2,000 or whatever are quite steep. Like what will your algorithm return in those cases? And then follow-up question, what will it return if that same picture is true, but the space is rotated through the axes so that it's not 8,000 axis aligned and 2,000 axis aligned, it's 8,000 but rotated, 2,000 but rotated. Because I think for a
hmm
lot of networks, practically speaking,
Is there sparse?
this is
Is
the
what you're
mental
saying.
model that I have. I guess I'm saying that the dimensions are very non-isotropic,
Hmm
and so you should think about how your algorithm handles that. So with random projections, certainly you don't have any axis aligned behavior. That's nice,
hmm
but um, you should think about how this will behave in that scenario.
hmm I'll take a look at that. That's a good idea. Any other questions? Oh, the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah, okay.
Are you open to collaborations? I mean, reach out to me and talk. Maybe we'll see. Um, if that's it, I guess that's it for my talk.
Just one little thing. It's a kind of
Yes.
point in terms of minimizing kind of regularization, minimizing the volume or something like that. It very reminds like energy-based learning. The same idea by Jan LeCun originally, that instead of
Mhm.
contrasting learning, you should regularize and minimize volume or something like around the minima. So
Some people have tried implementing flatness-based loss or optimizers, and they've had varying levels of success. I'm trying to understand, I guess, why that would be from the perspective of this theory for generalization. But yes, people have tried doing this. People have tried like implementing like flatness measures into their loss landscape to try and, if I were to go in the context of this picture, it'll only really work in this picture. But the idea is that maybe we can introduce some sort of loss or optimizer that makes it so that if it's really sharp, it just sort of doesn't see it, and we get this even without adding more data
right.
to varying levels of success.
Okay.
Okay, that's it from me.
Awesome. Is Lin also presenting,
Mm,
or is this is wrapping it up for you three?
No, no one today. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, good job. Good job, all two of you, three of you. Next up, we have Rajat.
Oh, okay. Hi. Um, can I share my screen?
Yep, please.
Okay. Mm, Okay, so yeah, I'm going to present this idea which I've been working for some time on. So this is called layer query networks for test time training, and many thanks to Jason for helping me like make the slides because whatever I do was very silly. Um, so yeah, so like whatever like where I am in the process is that we submitted this paper to NeurIPS and we got okayish ratings, and the major problem was that my writing was not that clear in the paper, so they wanted me to like rewrite the whole thing. And so right now like I'm trying to submit to AAAI and eventually like to ICLR if it doesn't go in. And I was like looking for any feedback to help improve the work. So like that's its journey in the peer review. Um, so basically the problem statement which I'm working on is that so if you look at like all the neural networks of the world right now, they are trained on a data set, right? So you take a data set and then you train your neural network. And the problem is that generally the weights, so you train it and then you fix the weights and then you deploy the model, and it is responsible for doing inference on a test set. But that is not like how humans work. We are like continuously learning through our lifespans. So the problem statement, like the problem setup under which I am operating, is known as test time training. So in test time training, what happens is that the idea is that you can train the network even during testing. So, um, and it also learns on just one single sample of a test sample. So what I will do is that first I will describe like what is test time training for like whoever is like might not have heard about it. And then I will tell like what problem statement I am trying to solve. Um, so basically, if you look at, so here is like a brief overview of test time training setup. So it was originally introduced by Yusun and Alexei Efros at Berkeley. And right now, like it's pretty well known in the field. Um, this thing is okay. So if you look at the classical way like we have worked, so here is like your input image, then you have like a backbone and you have like a downstream head on top of which like you train your network, and it generally does like some task like classification or segmentation. So you do like this training on train set, and during that time like both the backbone and the downstream head are trained, right? So that's why I have fire here. So I repeat, like this step is done for the train set in the test time training. So this is known as the training phase. And then during testing phase, basically we are not given a label, but the network is allowed to like adapt to a particular test sample. So here is like one of the ways in which it works. So like you take the backbone and you have like an input test sample which comes in, and obviously you can't use the label. So what you do is either you pass the network, you pass the test sample through the backbone, and then you get a new test sample, and like you get a new so basically the task you're trying to solve is that you will do some self-supervised learning on the test sample, like you will tell it whether you will mask some of the input and try to reconstruct the test sample, or maybe you will try to rotate it or like put it, solve a jigsaw puzzle kind of thing. So the idea is that you solve some self-supervised task on the test sample and update your backbone, and that way like the backbone will have more information about the test sample, and it will actually not you don't have to actually use any label for this process. So this is like one setting, and the other setting is like the second one is like this knowledge distillation setup. So this teacher is like the backbone which you trained in the training phase. So you pass your test sample through it and you get like some features, and you have a student. So basically that student is learning on the test sample, and you are trying to like mimic the teacher by whatever features it predicts for the test sample. And like when you are mimicking these features, basically the teacher is able to like generalize to this setting. It's able to generalize to this test sample, and that is what it is. So you either use the setting 1 or setting 2, and in both of these cases you are not using any label for the test sample, and the backbone is like trained here the student is being trained. And then so you do this step for like 15 to 20 iterations. So for every test sample, like you're updating the backbone to perform this SSL task. And in practice, like it takes like in practice it is taking like 15 to 20 iterations. And then during testing phase, what you do is that you pass whatever features you are predicting for the test sample to the segmentation head, to the classification head, and like you are performing the task of like doing inference on test sample. So the idea is that if you were not doing like this training phase, you would get like some accuracy. Um, yeah. So the idea is that if you do like the test time training in this way, like where you adapt the backbone for the test sample, you will get some features which are better, and then your performance will be very good as compared to like if you didn't do like this testing during, uh, if you didn't do this sort of test time training and just had like a static decision boundary. So before I like proceed further, is there like anyone who has like any doubt in the in the setting like which I'm trying to discuss? Hello.
I think it makes sense so far.
Oh, okay. That's good. So now here is like the problem statement which I'm trying to solve. So let's say you are given like this student teacher setup, and you are trying to like distill the knowledge of the teacher into the student. So if you stare at this long enough, you will start noticing like one thing. So the first point is that when you're trying to distill knowledge from the teacher, you will try to distill like all the layers. And here, like if you look at the student, it's trained for each test sample. So if the student is very big, the amount of time it takes for you to do test time training will be very high. So there are like two impossible problems here, which I like to call them, and they goes as follows. So let's say you want to distill some features from the teacher into the student, and if you want to distill all the intermediate features, the best you can do is like you can make the student architecture similar to the teacher. So if your teacher is like 12 layers of VIT, your student also has to be 12 layers. But the problem is that when you do test time training in this way, it would be very slow. So you can't like adapt your model very fast. And the second point is that if you only use like the last layer, so if you keep the student small and you only try to distill the last layer of the teacher, in that case you can't distill the intermediate layers of the teacher. So basically, it's a impossible chicken and egg problem. If you try to distill like a lot of layers, your student will have to have same architecture as the teacher, and that will make test time training slow. And if you try to distill only the last layer, in that case, you can't distill the intermediate layers, and your performance will be low. So it is like an impossible paradox. Like, how do you distill all the layers of the teacher and still like don't have this compute problem? And this is like a fundamental problem, right? This is like How do you distill a very big teacher into a very small student, distill all the layers and be able to retain the performance? And your student has to be small, like it has to be. So this is like a fundamental bottleneck in distillation. So whatever architecture is like, so the way like we come around to solve this problem is like a bit fundamental. So let me go over this figure. So let's say you have an input image and consists of 4 patches, and this is like a standard transformer. It consists of these attention layers. Now, these 4 tokens will be converted into 4 patches, right? So these each of these tokens is one of the features of the teacher for this particular image. So what you want to do is you want to distill all these tokens into a student. So if you look at any token inside, it can be indexed by 3 indices. 1 comma 1 means what's its position in the image, and the last one means what's its position in the layer. So if you have like n layers, you have, so each token is unique. So it is 2 comma 1 comma 2 means it's a second token, like it's in second row, first column, and it's at second layer. So you want to basically distill all these tokens into a student, and you don't want to run into those compute issues. So our idea is very simple. You can build a new kind of neural network, and what it does is that you take an image as input and you index it with the location of any token. So let's say you want to distill this 211. You take 2 comma 1 comma 1 as input, and then you predict like the green embedding, and you want this green embedding to be similar to the teacher. So basically, if you think about it, what the student is trying to do, it's trying to learn over all the possible input features of the teacher for a particular input, and it's like able to distill all the knowledge, and the student can be pretty small in practice. And then during inference, what you can do is you can query it with only the last tokens. So you can query it with like one you can query it with these 4 tokens, and it will directly give you the answer at the last layer. So that's what our method is. So if you think about this, this is actually bypassing deep learning also, because in deep learning, your assumption is that if you want to compute what's at last layer, you have to like basically you have to pass through all the layers sequentially. But in this case, like during inference, you can directly query it with the last layer, and it will directly spit out the answer which is at the last layer. So you have like this notion of being able to predict whatever is at any layer of a neural network in a constant amount of time. So the only time you will incur is the cost it takes to do a forward pass through this LQN. And it's a very small network. It's just 3 MLP layers in practice. So
So
uh,
is it fair to say you're distilling a big deep model and you're trying to distill it into a smaller, shallower model?
yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we have this notion where you can access any layer of the bigger model in constant time now,
Got it.
because you can index into it and you can directly query the small student.
Makes
So,
sense.
so this is like touching one of the most sacred laws of deep learning, right? That you have to keep stacking the blocks. But right here, if you learn the student in this way, you can access any layer in constant time. So you can imagine distilling a 150 layer ResNet or maybe even a 1,000 layer transformer. I don't know in future, but it will be constant time. Um, So now the key problem here is that you will think that when you do a distillation in this way from a teacher to student, the student will be small, so the performance will be very bad. And also because that's what we see in standard distillation, right? If you try to train a student in this smart way, and here like if you are trying to access intermediate layers in constant time, then there must be some trade-off, right? The performance must be reducing, but actually that's not what we are observing. In fact, what we are observing is that it's improving upon teacher in practice. So um so like some important questions like which we could ask ourselves by this architecture is that how does this architecture perform on test time training under classification, and can it like adapt to some samples it has never seen before. So for example, if you were training it on ImageNet and then you are trying to see like some how it adapts to like some setting like fog, noise, or maybe like some bad weather or things like that, that would be pretty interesting. So are there any better insights which we could take away? So as I mentioned, like we were doing it on student teacher setting. So I will go over the results one by one. So the red thing is like where you need to focus. So here what you see is like there are like these all the ImageNet splits we are testing. And if you just use a teacher and that there is no student teacher setup, and if you just benchmark how well the clips best model performs on like ImageNet A, V2 and all this. So that's like 76.2. So that is one thing. And if you look at, so this was a paper last year, and this is using the student teacher setup, but it's only distilling the last layer. So it's not distilling the intermediate layers. So it was performing better than clip. But as you know, like if you do test time training, like since you're optimizing for each test sample, you will be incurring some flops. So obviously it will not be as fast as simple inference, but you can still improve upon the performance of the teacher. And then this LQN is our model. It's basically able to beat the previous best model we had. And because it's distilling intermediate layers of the teacher also. So you can also see like as we make the teacher stronger. So between clip and open clip, the only difference is that it trains on like lion data set, which is bigger, and we can see better improvement. So LQN here, in this case, it's getting 78.6. In this case, it is getting 86.0, which is better performance on ImageNet. Similarly, we are able to like do the best, better than the best segmentation model out there. So Mass2Former was published by I think Bowen Cheng and Inshan Mishra in CVPR 22. So on cityscapes, the best result they get is 84.5 on MIOU. And then we are able to like do better than this result. We get 85.7. The teacher we are using is basically a stripped down version of Mass2Former, and that consumes actually lower G flops than the Mass2Former. So Mass2Former is consuming 5200. We are consuming, the teacher consumes 4350 because it's the stripped down version of Mass2Former, but its performance is lower than Mass2Former because when you try to make a network simpler, it will be worse in performance. But then when we use this teacher to do test time training, we are able to get better results than Mass2Former, and 4490 is still less than 5200. So we are actually incurring less compute cost than what it takes to do a simple inference through like the state of the art model. So that takes care of the argument that test time training is slow because we are consuming less G flops and we are getting better segmentation accuracy than a big transformer based model, even if it does simpler inference. So if you were
Hey,
to
Rajat,
pick,
we're kind of combining two very different ideas here. One is distillation and into a specific model called LQN with its specific structure. And a second idea is this test time training. Do these play particularly well together? Like, why are we trying both of these at once? Why don't we just look at, does LQN work well? Never mind test time training or vice versa.
because we were trying to do the simplest setting, like where you have to only adapt for one single sample, because it doesn't do really well on fully supervised task yet.
So if
Because
you just do distillation but no test time training, it doesn't work very well.
yeah, it doesn't work that well
Okay.
because it's very small and it overfits a lot. So when you're trying to adapt to one single sample, overfitting is actually good.
Okay. And then is this 4490, this is a total G flops. Does this include the forward pass through the teacher model and then the
Yes.
multiple iterations of the student model?
Yes. So when you take EOMT as the teacher, the first forward pass is 4350 flops, and then you run it for like 19. You run the student optimization for 19 for 19 iterations, and
Mm,
since it's a three-layered MLP, each flop consumes around 10 G flops or like uh 10 or 15, I don't remember.
mm, mm.
So
Interesting. So
This
it's really like
includes
and if you just run it through the teacher and you don't do the student, then you get 84.2, I guess.
yes,
So this weird procedure involving this tiny extra model that's shifting the distribution somehow bumps the performance from 84.2 to 85.7.
yes.
Hmm.
And so that's a weird procedure and it works.
Hmm.
So that is what we are doing. So here are like some segmentation results which we get. So you can see like we are able to segment the building also by doing test time training in this way. Um, so now before I end, like what is like one key insight which we should take away from the whole thing I discussed? Because as Jason mentioned, we are just doing test time training and we are trying to combine two ideas. So what if we simplify it and we want to just learn one takeaway, which we could take away and try to use in our own experiments? So what I want to do is I want to classify all the architectures in the world into these three categories. So one is, so this is how they share the weights among different layers. So if you see a CNN and a transformer, it actually shares the weight across different locations of the input. So if you have an image, the same attention matrix will be looking at different parts of the image. Similarly, in CNN, every layer will be looking at the image will be actually convolved by the same filter every time. So it's sharing the space weights across spatial dimensions. And however, in CNN, if you go deeper, every layer is deep. Like every layer has its own filter. So that's why it's not sharing the weights across depth. Now let's come on to universal transformers and RNNs. In RNNs, basically the same module is looking at the input as well as it's repeated across the depth. But the problem is that if you want to know what's at the depth of 10, you will have to unroll your computation and you will have to repeat that module 10 times to get the answer. And you will have to do sequential processing. So I am like inventing this new term called direct memory access. What it does is allows the architecture to predict what is at any layer in a constant amount of time, and that is actually against deep learning. It's orthogonal to deep learning, and that's the property of an architecture in which it can access whatever is at a particular depth in a constant amount of time, and that is what our architecture enables. Now you might question like why is this sort of property required in a neural architecture, and I will talk about it next. Um, so right now our community has operated on transformer, and what they do is like they train their network in three. So if you have to train a VIT, they will stack 12 blocks and they will call it a VIT base. Then they will stack 24 blocks, call it a VIT large, and then they will stack 32 blocks and call it a VIT huge. So if you see like depth is a dimension which is generally kept rigid, and a network like can't really control its own depth. And the deeper the architecture, the more amount of weights you need. So there is no weight sharing across depth happening. And even if you are doing weight sharing across depth, you are not having this property of direct access. So in our case, it is having all of these properties, and it's actually helping us do a weird sort of experiment. So let's say you have a teacher and you trained it for to predict up to 12 layers. And since the network is just taking this layer index as input, let's say you query it from layers 13 to 24 onwards, and you look at the output. Like, is it giving you better features? Is it able to generalize to features which were never even seen during training? Because if it does that, it directly means that you can train a network and then you can query it maybe with a layer of 10,000 and get better performance even if you didn't train it. So that would be pretty cool, right? So how well it would perform. So this was an experiment we did. So what we did is, so this EOMT was a segmentation model. It originally is a VIT-L model, which consists of 24 layers. So let's say you take 24 layers and you try to run segmentation inference on them. So that's basically around 58.5. And if you try to do test time training by distilling all these layers, 24 layers into the student, and you try to do test time tuning, you get the performance of 61.2. So this is okay, this is no biggie. And this red line is basically if you just try to predict the performance from 20 layers of this EOMT architecture, and you get a performance around 55.8. Now here is the funny thing. Now let's say you train a student on only the 20 teachers of EOMT architecture and only 20 layers, and you're trying to see how well it generalizes. So during inference, you're actually querying the student with layer ID 21, 22, 23, 24. And if you keep doing it, you will actually see that it's able to generalize to layers never seen before training. Now at layer 24, this blue dot is still below this green dot. What it means is that we are not able to surpass the performance of what it would have taken if you actually trained the teacher on all the 24 layers. But the funny thing is if you take this student and you query it with, let's say, layer ID 30, it will start performing better than this VITL baseline of 58.2. So that means you can just train a student on 20 layers, and then you could query it with layer ID 30, and it will start giving you better accuracy than the teacher, which is pretty weird, right? But if you think about it, it's not really weird because transformers can generalize to sequence lengths not seen during training. So if you train like a transformer using, let's say, 100 context length, it is able to generalize somewhat to like 150 context length. So the insight of our work is that you can treat depth as a sequence dimension, and then you can train network to have like this notion of variable depth. And that is actually helping us so that's helping us because deep learning said that depth is more like depth. Having depth is good, it will give you better accuracy, but that does not mean that you need to actually stack blocks on top of each other to get a better accuracy. You could query it with a larger depth and get the same answer. So like that's the bigger takeaway from this whole model. So this is like one
Rajat,
analysis.
we're a bit over time. We should maybe
Oh,
just try to wrap up kind of soon.
okay.
You can
Okay.
finish the
So
last
yeah,
slide.
yeah, so then I will just wrap up. So yeah, so this is like the key takeaway that deep learning involves like stacking blocks over one another. And another way is like you can query the feature at particular depth and directly ask the network for it. So there is no need of like stacking layers over one another anymore. And it might help make deep learning faster. I don't know whether it will replace deep learning. I don't think it will, but it might. But if you are given a sequential teacher, you could train like this student to be able to access any layer in constant amount of time. And then theoretically, like you could roll it out on an edge device and it will help us make it faster. So yeah, that's all I had. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Any thoughts, questions, feedback for Rajat?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, recurrence with shared weights is another way to increase the depth. It's like pretty much very similar, right? So, like number of recurrent cycles with shared weights is like also the same as depth increase.
Right.
And
But then if you want to know what's at depth 10, you will have to do recurrence for 10 steps.
yes, that's correct.
And that will not achieve the direct memory access which I am talking about.
Okay, okay.
Just one thought from my end. I really liked your numerical results. I think I would focus on making sure you continue looking at these numerical results to see what's working about as you expect, what's working better than you expect, what's working not as well, where does the model fail. I think looking at some of those in more depth might be illustrative.
Yeah, that's great. We can try that.
Do you have any intuition from like first principles about why this works?
So I think there are two things about brains which I want to talk about. Means first of all, I am not a neuroscientist, and second of all, I don't think like it's a good practice to see how brains work and how neural networks work because I don't think those two are like going hand in hand. And but I will still try to like make a comment. Like, so I think like in brains, like it's not like the input is like you are not doing like uh, the data passes from layer 1 to layer 2 to layer 3. So there is nothing like a sequential forward pass. It's more like all the layers are operating in parallel. So, and they are somehow communicating among themselves. So that is like what we need to build in the architectures. So this type of network in which like it's shared across the layers also, they will allow the higher layer to like communicate with the lower layer. And that is something which is helping us drive the performance.
So in this architecture, the way in which higher layers communicate with lower layers, because you've somehow parameterized this interactivity between layers by conditioning on the index of the feature.
Yes.
Okay.
So right now, if your higher layer is connected to the lower layer, you can't run backprop because the goddamn thing will form a cycle in the computational graph and you can't propagate the gradient because it's a circle, right?
Yes.
So that's why you can't have a skip connection which goes from the higher layer to lower layer. That's why all the skip connections go from lower layer to higher layer. But when you parameterize it, actually you allow backprop to learn it.
Yes. I haven't read your report. I think I would be having loads of light bulb, this is fantastic moments if fairly early in the report you deliver like the intuition behind why this would outperform or why this performs well in these contexts. And then everything else I'm reading is contributing to me getting a deeper understanding of something that makes intuitive sense. Because I haven't heard anyone in the ML community propose anything like this. So I don't know how to understand it. If you help me understand it early and then show me all of these metrics and explain, I'll perceive it as better purely just because I understand it more. I'm already perceiving it really well, but I think you could strengthen your case for this being new, novel, fantastic, if you eradicate my confusion as early as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, means we can chat later if you want over email, and I would be grateful to like talk more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
It's a good suggestion. I think, yeah, Yash or Rajat, working with collaborating back and forth with someone could probably help a lot here. Also, emphasizing what Eunice said, doing careful ablations to show people in the report as you're claiming why this is better. Do careful ablations to show like which factors end up mattering, which factors end up allowing this test time training combined with teacher-student distillation to actually boost performance by that extra % or so that you found. I think would be valuable.
Okay, thank you.
We're a bit over time, so I think we should wrap up and maybe continue any further discussions on Discord. Thanks everyone for attending Research Jam 28. Some great presentations, some interesting work. Hope to see you all next time. If you're watching this later and want to join some future Research Jam, we welcome presentations from just about anyone. Feel free to submit the form on the website. All right, let's thank the speakers one more time, and see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.